This is Persia, the first ever great empire mankind ever made. This is Persia, the cradle of humankind's ruling civilization. This is Persia, a location smack in the middle of Eurasia where wars for domination always raged. This is Persia, the spirit so unbreakable that it even consumed its conquerors. In the 4th century BC, Alexander the Great managed to topple Persia, only for the strongest of his descendants to rise from the Persian region with the Seleucid Empire. In the 7th century AD, the Arabs conquered Persia, only to have the Persians trailblaze Islamic culture and science. In the 12th century AD, the Mongol Empire completely swarmed Persia, only to have the invading Mongols and Turks convert to Persian-speaking Muslims. No matter how many times history tried to zero out this tenacious culture, the Persian identity was too strong to fade into insignificance. And indeed, it's still going strong today as a country called Iran, a country that somehow survived the absolute worst of America's sanctions. Iran is again in the news headlines, apparently making an epic comeback with other pariah nations like Russia, China, and recently Saudi Arabia, a blatant symbol of resistance against the established global order. But why? Have you ever wondered why Iran hates the West so much? It's easy to say that Iran is just evil or whatever, but there's also a lot more historical context to this. Let's explore the other side of the story and try to understand their point of view. The Arabs spread across the world with the invention of Islam, a religion contagious beyond anything humanity's ever seen before. Persia too fell to the Islamic Empire early on and adopted the Muslim identity. However, the Arabic Umayyad dynasty looked down on the Persians as second-class citizens, something that the proud Persians simply could not accept for long. The Persians bided their time, waited, and struck at the perfect moment by helping the Abbasid Caliphate destroy the Umayyad dynasty. The Abbasid Caliphate, as a token of its appreciation, promoted the Persians to first-class citizens and happily sat back and watched as the Persians unlocked the golden age of medieval Islamic civilization. The Persians did such a good job, in fact, that the heart of the Islamic Empire migrated from Levant to Baghdad, a place significantly closer to the hyper-productive Persia. The glory days of Islam were brought to an abrupt halt with a global disaster, the Mongol Empire. The Persians never experienced anything like the catastrophic Mongol invasion during their long history. I mean, the entirety of the Persian civilization, from Central Asia to their main base in the Iranian plateaus, were razed to the ground. Baghdad, the once proud capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, was thoroughly destroyed. Islam was no longer in charge, and the Mongols executed the caliph by stomping him to death with their horses to really drive the message home. Whatever was left of Islam fled to Cairo, and the Persian civilization was left behind without a second thought. Forced to submit under oppressors like the Mongolian Ilkhanate and the Timurid Empire, the proud Persians suffered centuries of chaos and egregious persecution during a never-ending attack to wipe out the Persian identity. And yet, they hung in there and refused to fade. Finally, in 1502, the long-awaited salvation for Persians arrived with the Safavid dynasty. The Safavid dynasty is a crucial part of the modern Iranian identity, a key link in the chain of history stretching all the way back to the medieval Islamic Empire and the ancient Persian civilization. The Safavid dynasty was built with the help of Turkish nomads, yes, but the Persian identity had such a vibrant presence that the king was called Shahanshah, a historically unique Persian title instead of something like a sultan or khan. It established a national state, officially known as Iran, and defiantly started its struggle as Shia Muslims. Historically speaking, Persians, so Iranians now, were followers of Sunni Islam along with the vast majority of the Islamic world. The founders of the Safavid Empire, however, were Shia Muslims, and were really concerned about the loyalties of their people. I mean, they were one religious revolution away from being overthrown and tossed under the rule of the Sunni Islam Ottoman Empire. If the people believed that overthrowing their leaders was what Allah wanted, well, the entire country could turn hostile against the ruling class really quick. So, the logical solution to this dilemma was to just eradicate Sunni Islam. All of it. This kind of mass forced religious conversion of so many people was completely unprecedented in human history, and the Shia Muslims desperately and ruthlessly did whatever was necessary to completely overhaul the operating system of their entire country. A century later, the vast majority of the Safavid Empire were loyal disciples of Shia Islam. This fight of ideology, the fundamental disagreement of Shia versus Sunni, quickly scaled to a conflict between nations, a permanent rivalry between the Arabs and the Persians. The Safavid dynasty, however, was never able to catch a break from its hostile neighbors like the Ottoman Empire. Eventually, the Hotaki dynasty from Afghanistan last hit the crumbling Safavid dynasty and shoved Iran into another century of chaos. Violent internal power struggles between factions like the Afsharid dynasty and the Zand dynasty kept Iran back until finally, in 1781, the Turks swooped in, again, to unify Iran by force. This time, they called themselves the Qajar dynasty, and their reign continued until the 20th century. You think Persian history was bad so far? Well, just you wait, because literal hell on earth is about to be unleashed for the entire Persian people when their incompetent rulers meet Western imperialism. By the late 18th century, when the Qajar dynasty unified Iran, the Western civilizations were already way ahead of everybody else on the planet. In contrast, the Qajar dynasty was still stuck in the medieval nomadic conqueror part of history, so far removed, in fact, that the kings didn't even speak Persian. The ruling elite, if you can call them that, had depressingly little understanding of the important things needed to run a modern country like politics, culture, economy. Islamic scholars called ulamas were running the entire government and bickering over interpretations of the Quran. Meanwhile, whatever progress was made during the past few hundred years in actually important industries like agriculture and trade was completely deleted. Needless to say, Iran wasn't anywhere near strong enough to defend itself against Britain and Russia in the 19th century. No, the ruling elite cheerfully sold away the crucial industries like tobacco, sugar, and tea for a few quick bucks. In fact, they sold away the rights for all resources in Iran for 60 years to British companies. A few decades of this utter failure in government, and it's no wonder why Iranian nationalism was blazing through the country, sparking countless violent rebellions against the Turkish and British overlords. But remember, the ruling elite thoroughly gutted Iranian culture, and only 5% of the entire population was literate at this point. The unfettered ideas of nationalism spread across the uneducated poor nomads like a contagion, and the Shia Muslim religious leaders were more than happy to exploit this. In 1905, all sorts of people forged a united front against the common enemy and kicked off the Persian constitutional revolution to demand some kind of law and order within the nation. This was such a massive movement that Britain and Russia, previously rivals, joined forces to put this rebellion down with overwhelming force and keep Iran down. The final nail in the coffin was the discovery of oil in the Gulf of Persia, which convinced Britain that Iran should not be set free under any circumstances whatsoever. Despite the fact that revolutionaries did get their constitution in 1909, it was a half-measured compromise where British and Russian troops would remain in Iran. Britain, of course, still maintained full access to Iranian oil. The proud Iranian people were still oppressed. Now, this sounds pretty bad, right? In 1914, World War I erupted and Iran got dragged in by Britain as a strategic stronghold. This meant that Germany and the Ottoman Empire did everything they could to destroy Iran in an attempt to hurt Britain. Iran, unfortunately, was just collateral damage. World War I ended in 1918, but Iran wasn't getting any better. The government was too weak. Congress hadn't had a single meeting in 2 years, and warlords ran amok in the countryside. The Russian troops had to go back home because of the Russian Civil War, leaving only Britain in charge of this failed state of Iran. Hey, Britain wasn't complaining. In 1919, Britain fed a massive bribe to the Iranian Prime Minister and his cabinet to formally induct Iran as a protectorate of the British Empire. Britain wasn't satisfied with just taking Iran's oil. Britain could now swallow the entire country for maximum exploitation. Everybody in Iran hated this, and I do mean everybody, from radical liberals to far-right conservatives, put aside their differences and joined together to fight for independence. Britain definitely overstepped here, and is about to lose the protectorate and the Iranian oil to a furious mob. Fuck it. Time to press the reset button. Britain starts a coup with a modernized military and completely overthrows the Iranian government. The man selected to be the new ruler of Tehran was a pure-blood Iranian general of the Persian Cossack Brigade named Reza Shah. He got rid of the useless prime minister, promoted himself as Secretary of Defense, and actually did a lot of good stuff for the company. I mean, very low bar because Iran was literally falling apart, but he satisfied the public by doing some of the much-needed land reform and the scrapping of some particularly unfair treaties. The rural warlords running amok in the countryside were kneecapped, one by one, until finally, for the first time forever, there was some resemblance of order in Iran. Reza Shah was in full control of Iran by 1923 and started to build Iran back up from ground zero. The initial goal was to make a republic based on Iranian nationalism like Turkey next door, but the religious leaders weren't having any of that nonsense. Alright, fine, whatever. Constitutional monarchy it is, and we'll just create a new dynasty. Happy? In 1925, Reza Shah officially became Shah Pahlavi I, marking the end of the cursed Qajar dynasty and the beginning of the Pahlavi dynasty. This new country was named the Imperial State of Iran, drawing from the glory days of the ancient Persian Empire. Under the rule of Pahlavi I, Iran finally became a livable country. A modern military was trained to wipe out the straggler, rural rebel forces. Extraterritoriality was banned, and schools were built all over for the general public. Women were allowed to go outside without hijabs, which was pretty much unthinkable back in 1925 and, I guess, 2023. The economy was making significant leaps due to massive government efforts for industrialization, with trains, factories, and businesses popping up everywhere. Meanwhile, Pahlavi I was getting ready to bite his creator. Yes, he got power in the first place because of the British Empire, but they were clearly a parasite stopping true Iranian progress. Pahlavi I forced the British troops out of the southern oil fields and confiscated significant British shares in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. It seemed like peace and prosperity were finally, and Jesus Christ, finally, coming to Iran. Things may have been looking all rosy on the outside, but the Iranian government was fundamentally rotten to the core. I mean, the government was taken over by a violent coup instigated by Britain, remember? Congress was a joke, corruption ran rampant, and income inequality was accelerating by the day. The general public was getting more and more resentful about these so-called changes that only helped the ones in charge. Things started to rapidly spiral out of control. The Pahlavi dynasty was so into reform and westernization that it tried to oppress Islam. And, well, that's never going to work well in the Middle East. While Pahlavi was busy antagonizing his entire people, he made one crucial error. In order to spite Britain, he buddied up with Britain's worst enemy, Nazi Germany. Yeah. In 1941, Nazi Germany sneak attacked the Soviet Union with Operation Barbarossa. The Allies needed to send some help to the USSR, and you can't get there without passing through Iran. So, the spotlight's on Iran. You're either with us or against us, buddy. What's gonna be? Pahlavi I gets decision paralysis at the worst possible time and couldn't really commit to a side. Fuck this! The impatient British and Soviet soldiers launch a full-scale invasion to take Iran by force. Iran was completely gutted. Again, Pahlavi I was dragged out of the throne, and his son, Pahlavi II, was put in charge of Iran. Say what you will about Pahlavi I, but at least he was a charismatic leader. His son, however, was not. His son was pretty useless and never should have been in charge of anything. After World War II ended, all sorts of anti-Pahlavi political parties popped up and took control of the government, with a man named Mohammad Mossadegh becoming prime minister in 1951. Mossadegh was an anti-Western, nationalist, socialist, and didn't give a fuck. Immediately after he took office, he did the unthinkable and repossessed all the British oil companies and infrastructure. All mine now. Just like that. Simple solution, right? This was the first time that a Middle Eastern country dared to blatantly cross the mighty British Empire like that. Britain and America were absolutely furious, whatever, blah blah blah, sanctions and sealing off Iranian waters, but Mossadegh just went over to the Soviet Union for help and refused to budge. The situation does not look good for Britain. Well, only one thing left to do, really. Time to press the reset button on the Iranian government again. In 1953, Britain and America backed Pahlavi II, that useless, uncharismatic, waste-of-life son from earlier, and fire up another coup. Mossadegh was overthrown and sentenced to lifelong imprisonment, and Pahlavi II unleashed his inner dictator to be even worse than his father. Britain and America were firmly in charge of Iran again. The parliament was reduced to nothing more than a formality. And most importantly, the oil went back to the West. Believe it or not, this actually seemed like good news for Iran. America was scared shitless of socialists like Mossadegh popping up again and chucked unlimited money at Iran. Oil experts were humming along, and hey, the economy's actually doing better than ever before in Iranian history. By the 1970s, the oil shock massively boosted the price of oil, and Iran was literally rolling in money. Hey, now they can actually afford the newest American weapons and have a strong military. Wanting to be the power in the Middle East, Iran even flex-deployed troops to Oman, Pakistan, and Iraq. Unfortunately, Pahlavi II inherited that irresistible reform impulse from his father and wouldn't stop doing the radical shit that everybody hated. Pahlavi forced a redistribution of land and did the unthinkable. He gave women voting rights. This symbolized a much bigger problem. Pahlavi was disrespecting Allah and Islam. To be fair, the Pahlavi dynasty was always slapping around the Islam community, and it just so happened that Islam community made up the vast majority of the population. This was the final straw, and the spiritual leader of Islam, a charismatic lecturer called Ruhollah Khomeini, rose up and demanded an Islamic fundamentalist nation. Khomeini wasn't just a religious leader. He was a revolutionary with a vision of a brand new political structure that nobody has ever seen before. An Islamic republic. After all, a Muslim country shouldn't have a king by principle, which means that it has to be a republic. However, a Muslim country should be run by Muslim priests, which would put them above the government and Pahlavi. Pahlavi, understandably, didn't particularly like this nonsense and exiled Khomeini in 1963. Oops, he just gave Khomeini an international stage, and Khomeini was free to continue his anti-Pahlavi crusade without censorship in Iraq and Turkey. Oil prices finally dropped in the late 70s, and the Pahlavi kingdom was exposed for the incompetent mess it was once the infinite money glitch was patched up. Their reckless industrialization and arms spending came back to bite them in the ass with a vengeance. The economy completely went bust, and all that money thrown around carelessly just caused unstoppable inflation. The Iranian people were, not happy, and could finally express this deep fucking resentment because the dictatorship was slowly losing its iron grip. The working class was furious because they never saw a dime of the oil money. It all went into stupid economic policies or into the pockets of the dictator's buddies. The middle class and skilled professionals were furious because they wanted democracy. And the Muslims were absolutely livid because their religion was disrespected far too long. In 1978, a massive protest demanding the end of the Pahlavi dynasty rampaged through East Tehran, which was the perfect opportunity for exiled Khomeini, remember him, to rile up the Islamic fundamentalists. Pahlavi II did the typical dictator move, declaring martial law and shooting protesters. But he lost popular support long ago, and this only fueled the protests into a full-scale revolution. After months of chaos, Pahlavi II fled to Egypt with his family, and Iran welcomed back Khomeini from his exile to be the supreme leader of their new Islamic Republic. This, my dear viewer, is the Iran we know today. Post-revolution Iran was built focusing on two ideals: fundamentalist Islam and anti-Western sentiment. After all, from Iran's point of view, it had nothing but terrible experiences with the West for over 100 years. Yeah, all-out Sharia law isn't ideal, but they did try non-Islam, pro-Western governments too, and it always ended horribly. The Persians are a proud people with a long history, and at least this government, as dysfunctional as it may be, is one that finally belongs to them. Now, that's not to say that they're blameless victims here. They're obviously not, and you can look up the Western point of view anywhere on the internet. However, I can understand why Iran would rather side with Russia if it means spiting Britain and America. But Hey, what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. This has been David Bradford from Knowledge Raiders, and thank you for watching.